And like modern-day Disney, yours truly stands ready to right the wrongs of the past, so let's get to it. First, yes, it would have not made any sense for Beamdog in their enhanced edition of Icewind Dale to give players the possibility to import their characters over from Baldur's Gate. Because though it would have been cool mechanically, Baldur's Gate 2 takes place in 1369 Dale's Reckoning in D&D's timeline, and Icewind Dale takes place in 1281 Dale's Reckoning, which is almost 100 years before. And yes, your character would have been leveled stupidly high, and Icewind Dale starts as a low-level adventure. Second, yes, there are 8 strongholds in Baldur's Gate 2. Hopefully this is the last time I hear about this shit in the comment section from the actually crowd. And third, Deus Ex is indeed one of the 10 best games of the 2000s. In my defense, I'll say that at the time I made that video, I still had the childlike illusion that I'd be putting out one video per week.
You serious?
So I rushed it, and I made the unforgivable mistake of leaving out one of the best games ever made. Deus Ex is up there, I shit you not, with Pong, Adventure for the Atari 2600, Colossal Cave Adventure, Temple of Apshai, Tetris, and the original Super Mario Bros. In the pantheon of titles that changed the gaming world forever. If you wonder why old farts like us are not all that impressed with intricate game worlds with cleverly interconnected areas like the ones you see in Dark Souls, Sekiro, or Elden Ring, you need not look any further than this title. If you give us shit online because we're not oh-boying and oh-wowing about the freedom players have in Baldur's Gate 3 to do whatever they want, however they want, whenever they want, don't waste your time with your clumsy exercises of sarcasm that always start with a lol, blame Deus Ex for doing it first, 23 years ago, and thus watering down the impact of similar gameplay for years to come. And if you wonder why we think a certain virus is very likely the product of evil engineering with nefarious purposes, and why we are seriously suspicious about the role of government and Big Pharma in the production of the cure, well, this 23-year-old game is what you should be looking at. And the concept of synthesis that some of you got introduced to in Mass Effect 3? Yeah, Deus Ex did that first too. And better, if you ask me. Welcome to Ye Olde Entertainment. My name is Alex, and as you know, it is my duty, my mission, my purpose in life to help you decide whether that game that you have been thumbing for so long is indeed the right game for you or not. Not today, though. I know Deus Ex would be an extremely hard sell these days to anyone but the most hardcore retro gamers, the OG gamers whose whole perspective on gaming has already been magically changed forever by this title, or cheap bastards who care more about bargains than they do about gaming.
You are projecting.
Yes, I am. But I think there are 2 discussions worth having about Deus Ex. The first one, we have come a long way in the last 23 years in the world of video games, but we have also lost a lot. And the second one, who did it first, is important. And it's especially important, I think, to understand why younger and older generations of gamers don't see eye to eye. So let's get into the first discussion, shall we? We have come a long way in the last 23 years in the world of games, but, like I said, I would think long and hard before recommending the original Deus Ex to anyone who's under 35 years old. I would be specially doubtful about recommending it to people who mostly grab their games from the mainstream AAA shelves. Because I have to say that playing this game after so many years turned out to be not quite what I expected. The game hasn't aged well in many respects. That is to say that some of its design decisions aren't going to fly with today's audiences. Like, at all. Good thing you saved all that money when you got this game for 37 cents on good old games. Cause if you're in your 20s or early 30s and you commit to finishing the game to get your money's worth, I bet you're going to have to invest some of the money you saved in a new mouse and a keyboard, because Deus Ex is a catalog of bad design decisions by modern day standards. The game's idea of progressive difficulty is to increase the number of enemies that you have to deal with in mission-critical rooms, introducing new enemies with more hit points, and giving them weapons that do significantly more damage or that can even insta-kill you. Oh, and throwing in a few of those lethal on-death effects that gamers love these days. There are also plenty of other insta-kill situations, like standing on the way of a closing door. Yup, you know, a regular door that closes. Or poorly timing a jump that requires surgical precision. Or getting hit by almost any attack late in the game. Another thing that has not aged all that well is enemy AI. I didn't think much about it at the time. In fact, there was some sense of accomplishment to figuring out how to abuse the dumb enemy AI in order to make the most out of every fight. And there is still some charm to this, but by today's standards, the bad guys in Deus Ex are hilariously stupid. It's okay though, the game's combat is so broken at times that cheesing the enemy AI is the only way to get through some parts. Serious FPS drops that render the game almost unplayable and require you to quit and log back in are not uncommon in Deus Ex, especially in later levels. And there are utterly irritating repetitive sounds that pierce your ears in every level, like alarms that go off and won't shut the fuck up during the entire level, or robots that declare that they are scanning the area every other fucking second. There are also mild annoyances like having to rearrange your inventory every time you pick an item that occupies more than one slot, and a ladder climbing animation that is harder to control than a bad eating habit for a body positivity activist. And while I wouldn't blame it on Deus Ex being a product of its time, I still have to mention the laughably bad voice acting in this game. This was a meme even at that time, so Deus Ex did that first too. But some people would say it's so bad that it actually goes full circle and ends up being good.
News of Trial Wars. Red Arrow versus its ruminous pack.
This would get cancelled in a nanosecond these days.
Hand-painted China, very authentic.
You with the police?
Hi, baby. What's your name?
JC.
Mysterious. Want to know my initials?
How about you tell me something about the people who come here?
Anything you like, cutie. 20 credits.
This is getting a little too real for me. I'm gonna crack open a beer.
Well, it is hilarious, I'll give you that. But when I played Deus Ex for the first few times 23 years ago, I didn't find any of these issues to be annoying. Hell, I don't think you could even say they were issues at the time. It was just where 3D games were at back in the day. And all this makes me think about just how far we've come in the realm of video games. Insta-kill mechanics for which there is no counterplay, other than straight out avoiding the situation that causes them altogether, is considered bad game design these days. And I didn't hate Deus Ex back in the day because of these insta-kill situations, but I could barely play a minute more of Everspace 2 for this exact same reason when I played it just this year. Nowadays, we don't have time to bundle in items in bags of holding to keep our inventory neat, tidy, and usable, in games in which inventory management isn't even the focus. We want tabs and filters and all forms of sorting criteria. We give Baldur's Gate 3 shit for not having some of these features, but back in the day we were okay with Icewind Dale 2 or Planescape Torment not having, well, any of these functions. And the same thing goes for the clunky sound mix and irritating repetitive sounds or even the voice acting. Actually, having fully voiced conversations that didn't sound like they were coming from a recording booth somewhere in another dimension was pretty freaking groundbreaking at the time. But Deus Ex is also one of those holy shit games, a title that revolutionized gaming like few other titles have before or since. While it doesn't offer much in the way of branching paths and decision nodes, every tiny little thing you do in this game becomes a butterfly effect that impacts your gaming experience in the most unexpected ways. And when you see the consequences of using your last electronic tool to open a door that you could have found the code to if you had explored the area a little bit more eagerly, or when you realize that you saved yourself a world of pain because you decided to jump into the water to see if anything happened, and you ended up finding a massive shortcut to a mission-critical room through a secret dark pipe, that's when you realize that you are in the presence of a masterpiece. Deus Ex is one big world of obstacles, tools, and goals for you to figure out. It won't tell you how to get things done, but it also won't judge or even question your methods or your reasoning. Everything is fair game in Deus Ex. And this is something that we hadn't experienced before, or at least Not in a 3D world consisting of incredibly intricate scenarios and interconnected areas filled with crates, tools, and even TNT boxes to play around with to get shit done. This one time I had to get into this room, but I didn't have the key to the door or enough lockpicks to force it open. I was also too scared to backtrack to go looking for the key, because there were a bunch of robots out there that I had to snuck past because they were tearing me a new one. So I went into the kitchen inside the building, grabbed a few pans, and piled them up on top of some crates to get in through the window. Yup, a seasoned UNATCO human-cyborg hybrid, piling up kitchen utensils to get in through a window. But hey, it worked, and that's the beauty of this game. There are even NPCs that you can talk to that will give you valuable information that might help you get around the challenge easily or sneak into a place without too much of a hassle. In some cases, you just need to say the right words. Some other NPCs will demand that you pay for the info, others will ask that you do a little something for them in return, and yet in some other cases, you'll get the chance to choose your preferred approach to get what you want. Now that's some proper RPGing right there. Choice and consequence and opportunity cost, the two things that I look forward to the most every time I get a new RPG, come together masterfully and in beautiful harmony in Deus Ex. And I wouldn't even call this game an RPG, strictly speaking, even if people have labeled it such from time to time. But allow me to illustrate the greatness of this title with a few examples from my most recent playthrough. Because I chose computers and electronics as my starting perks at the beginning of the game, I was able to repurpose these gun turrets to attack my enemies. And that's why I could bait shoot two groups of bad guys to lure them into this room to have the turrets there do my dirty work for me. If I hadn't made that decision at the beginning of the game, I probably would have had to push this cart with TNT toward them and then shoot the damn thing to blow the bad guys up. Or I could have started shooting at them to lure them onto me and then shoot the TNT charge to finish them off. But because I hacked the turrets, I didn't have to do that. And that of course meant that I left this TNT box intact, which came in very handy because throughout the mission, I spent more rockets than I should have trying to kill things that I could have easily killed more efficiently if I had had the patience. So by the time I had to destroy a bunch of these Robocop bad guy looking robots, I didn't have enough rockets to destroy all of them, so I used that spare TNT box to get rid of the last of them. Later on in the game, at some point I had to lower a bridge to get to the other side of a room to complete a mission objective, but there were gun turrets on each side of the room that preceded the bridge, and the controls to operate the damn thing were located within range of one of them. And to top things off, both of my legs had been blown apart. So I crawled up behind this crate and slowly but diligently pushed it towards the closest turret, using it as a shield. And as soon as I got to a safe spot, I hurled an EMP grenade to disable the damn thing. I would have thrown an explosive grenade, but I had also run out of those by that moment. But that bought me enough time to crawl to the controls, introduce the code that would lower the bridge, and go for a final desperate crawl into the room. And, much to my surprise, there was a service bot waiting for me in the room. A helpful little buddy who can recharge your character's augmentations. And because I had an augmentation that did healing over time, I could use the robot to create an endless chi cycle of heal and recharge. You see, if I had chosen any other augmentation for that particular slot, any other, and there's a shitload of them in this game, I probably wouldn't have lasted one more minute after this painful odyssey. I probably would have had to load a saved game from an hour ago. But because I had chosen that particular augmentation, I was restored to full health and full energy. That's right, I ended up being better than new, when I had been on the brink of the game over only a couple of minutes before. And while the story is pretty linear, except for the final act of the game, there are various little in-game choices that you can make that have an impact on how things play out story-wise later on. By the end of this mission, for example, you can go ahead and board your black helicopter like you usually do. And you may very well do this and get the hell out of there. But...
Get to the chopper! Hold up. Wait a minute. Something ain't right.
there's a dead technician just lying there, and some other dude just standing about very suspiciously. If you talk to the guy that's just standing there, you'll pick up that something ain't right indeed. So if you follow your gut and kill the guy there and then, a different dialogue sequence, one that acknowledges your recent actions, triggers when you meet your pilot. And killing this dude eventually turns out to be a really good call. but you only find out several missions later. Because if you don't pay attention to the dead guy or the suspicious looking dude at the end of this mission, then your helicopter will blow up dramatically eventually, therefore killing your faithful pilot friend in the process. And the best thing about this whole deal is that talking to this dude isn't even an optional side mission. You just do this out of pure immersion. And there are a few other little secrety secrets for you to uncover. And secrety secrets like this were not uncommon in video games back in the day, and I feel like we have lost some of these little secrety secrets in games nowadays. But more importantly, we have lost a great deal of opportunity cost. I believe I've talked before about opportunity cost here on the channel several times before. To me, it's the biggest and best source of replay value, but it's also what makes everything you accomplish in any game feel truly deserved. Sacrificing all the benefits and wonders of the roads not taken is always a high price to pay, and that's why some developers these days go through some ludicrous mental gymnastics to give the player all the freedom in the world, while also sparing them the costs of their decisions. And this is a huge mistake in my opinion. Despite its impressive character creation screen and all the choices that you have gameplay wise, as well as on the narrative end of things, Encased was a one and done deal. On the other hand, I can't wait to submit myself to my 4th playthrough of Underrail to see what this new expansion Heavy Duty is about. One big difference between these two games is that in Encased, the only roads that remained not taken were those that I was too lazy to backtrack and take, or the ones that I didn't bother putting in the extra little effort that was required. No choice in Encased entailed any significant sacrifice other than the time invested in a particular action. You don't have a good enough level of lockpicking to open a crate? No biggie, just do something else for half an hour, level up, put every point you get into the appropriate skill and go back and open it. Can't access this spot because you can only get to it if you have a jetpack and you don't have the skill to use it? No problem. Just wander about until you get the skill needed to craft the thing and the perk that enables you to use jetpacks, and voila. Deus Ex, on the other hand, is the king. The Rolls Royce, the Coiba, the Priscilla Ricard of opportunity cost. Everything, every tiny little thing you do in Deus Ex involves some sort of gratification, reward, or long-term advantage, at the huge cost of, well, every other similar gratification, reward, or advantage. And while this is true of your starting perks, the weapons you choose at the Quartermaster, and just about everything else, it's the augmentations that steal the show here. These augmentations aren't like your typical run-of-the-mill half-assed numeric bonus perks that make you hit harder or run faster. You have drones that allow you to scout the path ahead, heal overtime augmentations, devices that protect you from natural hazards, and a slew of other things that very much translate into a full-scale build. A build that matters. A build that has an impact not only on the combat aspect of the game, but on every decision you will be making about which room to go to and how to get there, which enemy to engage, and even whether or not to engage enemies. Even some underwater escape routes and secret passages may be viable or not, depending on which augmentations you have. Revisiting Deus Ex after 23 years felt like dusting off not only a game, but the feeling of adventure that comes from the knowledge that every little step you take entails a sacrifice, and that in turn brought back a feeling of accomplishment that I very rarely seem to get from games these days. Opportunity cost has been a massive pillar of gaming for me, and I feel like it's slowly crumbling into oblivion. If I were an optimist, I would say that some games are still being designed around this principle, like Disco Elysium with its branching narrative paths that stem out of failed skill checks and player-based decisions, or Underrail, which makes some courses of action impossible to traverse if you don't fully commit to the skill that makes them viable, or Tyranny with its rich design of roads and roads not taken. But Deus Ex was massively popular back in the day, and it thrived on the pillars of choice and consequence and opportunity cost. But all those games I just mentioned are indie games. So I wonder how long before this pillar of gaming becomes a thing of the past? And more importantly, why is it not that popular anymore? The second discussion that I believe we can have around Deus Ex is why who did it first is important. I can see why some people are fascinated with the fact that you can grab some random tiefling kid in the middle of a street in Baldur's Gate 3 and use it as a weapon by tossing him onto an unsuspecting enemy who's busy fighting the rest of your party down at the docks. This is the type of thing that I want to see more in games, and not many games allow you to do stuff like this, but Deus Ex did it first, and this just watered down the impact and novelty of the tiefling tossing experience for us old farts. It's still pretty damn cool, but we've seen it before. And it's not just Baldur's Gate 3 that gives you this level of freedom. The new Hitman games are deliciously sandboxy and fun, and the replay value is off the fucking roof compared to, well, just about anything that you can play these days. It seems to me like the guys at Outside Extra and Outside Xbox made more videos about Hitman 2 than they did about every other game they went over combined. They just couldn't stop milking the fun out of these titles. And I can see why. Man, the more I talk about these games, the more tempted I am to reinstall them and play them again. But even these new Hitman games, as awesome as they are, still feel like they are treading upon a beaten trail that was thoroughly traversed by the original Deus Ex almost 2 decades before them. I think there is value in what Larian did with Baldur's Gate 3 this year in the world of gaming. A lot of it, in fact. It blended together the cutscene-based narrative design of Dragon Age Origins and the clever level layout and combat design of Larian's own Divinity Original Sin 2. It made choice and consequence and player agency the turnstones of a game that was made for a mainstream market. And it did succeed in fascinating the normie side of the gaming world with these things. Getting normies excited about choice and consequence? That's actually pretty impressive. But to me, it's all about who takes it to the next level. And while Baldur's Gate 3 may very well be where the genre sits at right now, it climbed a ladder that was mostly built by others. I guess you could say this of every other game that has been developed, but there is no question that some titles have changed the game of games more than others. And it's hard to think of a title that revolutionized the game more than Deus Ex. You can always tell that you've played a great game by the time you see the credits roll, but timeless classics only become such in time. This is also true of their narrative, story, and lore aspects. Take for example Fallout and Fallout 2. The Fallout Bible today is almost an X-Files case. It's got near the Simpsons levels of prediction. Hell, at this point I'm just hoping the coincidences between the events described in the Fallout Bible and our own modern reality stop before the Great Nuclear War. An event that doesn't seem entirely outside the realm of possibilities these days. But I am pretty sure that those who conceived Fallout's original lore were not gifted with amazing powers of premonition. I think the reason behind their surprisingly predictive creation is much simpler. Nothing in Fallout was pulled out of someone's ass. There is no plot convenient bullshit. There is no wouldn't it be cool if. There is no what this IP really needs is. Everything in Fallout is deeply rooted in verisimilitude, from the currency used in the wasteland and the long-winded explanation of how it came to be, to the evolution of artificial intelligence, to the emergence and proliferation of totalitarian mafia-like groups in the wake of failing states. All these things that we see in Fallout are consistent with the human ways. And the same thing could be said of Deus Ex if you think of it. In fact, let's go briefly over the most relevant points in Deus Ex's plot, shall we? Let's see, we have a human-made virus known as the Grey Death that threatens to kill a large chunk of the planet's population, shady cooperation between government agencies and pharmaceutical companies in regards to the production of the cure, a government agency working for an authoritarian faction who seeks to take advantage of the health crisis to seize total control over the state, the world even, the fact that the virus and the cure were made by the same people. Deus Ex said that, not me, by the way. Then you have an AI that was created with the purpose of preserving humanity, which is smart enough to pick up on the fact that humans aren't all that efficient at preserving themselves. So it decides that it must intervene. And its idea of an intervention includes synthesis.
And that is?
Add your energy to the crucibles.
Yep, the AI in Deus Ex wishes to merge with your character to rule the world as a benevolent dictator with infinite knowledge and reason. So, recapping a bit. Intricate 3D scenarios with interconnecting areas that include underwater passages.
Deus Ex did it first.
Sandbox gameplay reined in by a high-stakes story that gives you purpose all the way through.
Deus Ex did it first.
Choice and consequence and opportunity cost blended together in beautiful harmony.
Deus Ex did it first.
It's intensifying to the point where we may not be able to contain it.
Why contain it? Let it spill over into the schools and churches. Let the bodies pile up in the streets. In the end, they'll beg us to save them.
The Who is working on right now is ridiculously scary, and they are actually playing on people's fear that that this entire situation has created in order to move forward a, authoritarian mandate that potentially has the capacity to undermine sovereign governments.
Deus Ex did it first.
The revolving door between the FDA and Big Pharma.
Deus Ex did it first.
There's another solution. Synthesis.
Deus Ex did it first.
I've been around for almost as long as video games themselves, and there have been just a few of them that I've seen for the first time in my rear view mirror, and games like Space Invaders, Asteroids, or Super Breakout weren't even that old by the time I got around to playing them. Almost every game-changing, brain-dislocating title that has ever come out I got to experience in its own time. And believe me, there have been only a handful of games that have changed the game of games like Deus Ex. In a time in which developers were clumsily stumbling about trying to figure out the kind of experience that 3D was best suited for, the chaps at Ironstorm, the creators of Deus Ex, had not only figured it out completely, but they also delivered huge intricate scenarios with interconnected areas that would put more recent games like Dark Souls to shame. They designed a large sandbox playground filled with challenges and tools for you to play about however you wished, and even had the brilliance to design this world in a way that didn't allow the player to corner himself out of solutions. And they had the good sense to ring in this sandbox experience with a stake-driven story that gave you purpose all the way through, and a pretty damn good one at that. For those who came to the party of video games only 12 or 13 years ago, this title may not seem like much. I understand that there is no way for these people not to compare this title with newer, more sophisticated games that are as awesome as they are, only because Deus Ex did it first. But if you ever decide to embark upon the crusade to revisit the story of this most fabulous form of entertainment, there are a handful of quintessential titles that you must absolutely not miss. And make no mistake about it, Deus Ex is one of them. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, thank you for watching all the way up until now. If you like what you are seeing on this channel, please consider subscribing and clicking that notification bell to avoid the usual YouTube shenanigans. Come check us out on Discord if you don't mind all the boomer talk that goes on there. I personally love it and wouldn't change it for anything. Share the video if you thought it was cool, but most importantly, never stop gaming, but don't let gaming get in the way of your hopes and dreams. Bye everyone.